My dad was like no other. He was an accomplished CPA. Now, that in itself might not seem so unusual, but how many accountants do you know who are also adept at wilderness survival? He could identify all the animal tracks and their scat. He knew the difference between poison oak and poison ivy. He taught me how to climb the rocks and tell time by looking at the sun. Oh, out there in the woods with my dad, I felt like Pocahontas. One time, we were walking along the railroad tracks, and we heard a train in the distance. It was coming our way. Dad took some pennies out of his pocket and placed them on the track. The train thundered by with such force and such noise. After it passed, Dad picked up the pennies. Now they were hot, flat, and paper thin. I stared at him with amazement. Dad, how do you know this stuff? His answer? The Army. Then there was the time Mom was sick and Dad prepared breakfast. Now, my father never, ever went into the kitchen, even for a Coke. Oh, yes, he was old school. But Mom had a fever, and there he was, hovering over a hot stove, cracking eggs into the skillet. I was in shock. Dad, I didn't know you could cook. Sure, I can cook. I can do everything. Everything? How did you learn everything? His answer? The Army. So, like many men of my father's generation, his social life revolved around the family. After dealing with all the cousins and aunts and uncles, who had time for anyone else? But sometimes, occasionally, someone from the outside world would penetrate our family cocoon. The phone would ring, a gruff man's voice would be on the line, one I didn't recognize. Is your father there? Hold on. Dad, telephone. Who is it? I don't know. Oh, for Christ's sakes. Ask who's calling. Oh, never mind, I'll take it. And with that, he'd get on the phone, lock the door, and he'd be talking for the next hour. All I could hear were muffled dirty jokes, dirty words, and lots of laughter. Eventually, the call would end. He'd emerge, and I'd ask, who was it? An old buddy. From where? The Army. Dad, was the Army fun? No, it was hell. I hated it, every minute of it, but they made a man out of me. Well, even though I was only 8 years old, I knew all about Army life from television. Phil Silvers, Sergeant Bilko. I used to watch Sergeant Bilko every day with his men in the adventures, and my dad kind of looked like him. You know, the large frame glasses, type A extrovert, always up to something. Long after the show went off the air, I could easily imagine my dad in uniform kibitzing with Phil Silvers. This image easily coexisted with our family's suburban life of comfort and convenience. But sometimes a mood crept over my father. He seemed remote and inaccessible. During these times, his focus was somewhere else. Emotionally, he was far away, all alone, high up, silently standing guard on some distant rocky cliff, protecting everyone and everything he held dear. And that's why, when the time came, I wanted to protect him. After my mom died, my father lived alone in their home. His house, like him, was falling into disrepair. I worried about him constantly, especially as the lung cancer progressed. Every other month, I'd fly in from California to spend a week with him in Maryland. This was not a viable plan. We had to talk. Dad, I can't keep coming back here so often. Who asked you to? I looked around the house. Oh, every surface was piled high with mountains of unopened junk mail. The fireplace was packed with newspapers, not for kindling, just storage. The floor tiles were cracked and chipped. There was a hole in the ceiling the size of a bathtub. When it rained, it poured. Everything in the house smelled like mold and mildew. Dad, it's dangerous for you to be here. My father looked down, covered his face, took a deep breath, and when he looked up, he looked straight at me. All the lines and crevices in his face seemed to disappear. He was no longer an 83-year-old, old, gray, dusty old man. For a moment, my father appeared young again. He was red and raw. What did you just say? I said it's dangerous for you to live here alone. Dangerous? You call this dangerous? Yes, you could slip on the floor. A hunk of plaster could hit you on the head. The food you eat could kill a moose. You call this dangerous? He began pounding his chest. The blue veins in his neck pulsed with rage. My home is not dangerous. It's the world out there that's dangerous. But Dad, I cut off Hitler's balls. Don't think you're going to put me in Leisure World. It was at that moment when I finally saw my father in all his glory. Oh, there he was, the courage, the strength, the wit. And I could see through time. I could see my father as a 21-year-old GI, a kid far from home, trudging through the snow-covered fields of Europe. And I could see my father. He was one of our bravest soldiers. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, the battle which broke the Nazi stranglehold on Europe. And I could also see that my father, Hitler, didn't stand a chance because my dad was in the army.